The year I turned 73 was the year I learned that age is just a number, but revenge is a dish best served with a side of justice. My name is Margaret Clark, and this is the story of how I lost my home, my dignity, and nearly my family before I took it all back with one phone call. I never thought I'd have to sell the farmhouse. Thomas and I had purchased it as newlyweds 50 years ago, both of us barely in our 20s with more dreams than dollars. We'd restored it ourselves, spent countless weekends stripping ancient wallpaper and refinishing hardwood floors. Every creaky floorboard and sun-faded windowsill held memories, Sarah taking her first steps in the kitchen, Thomas building that tire swing on the oak tree, our golden retriever Rusty curled up by the fireplace during winter storms. But life has a way of changing your plans. Thomas passed away 8 years ago, heart attack, quick and merciful, the doctor said. I stayed on alone, managing the 10 acres and old farmhouse reasonably well until my arthritis made the stairs a daily challenge. When my granddaughter Emily got accepted to Cornell with only a partial scholarship, I knew what I had to do. Mom, you can't sell the farm, Sarah protested when I told her my decision. It's been in our family for 50 years. And now it's going to fund Emily's education? I replied, setting down my teacup with a decisive clink. Your father would have wanted this, but where will you live? Sarah's husband Richard asked, his voice carrying that artificial concern I'd grown familiar with over the years. Richard Palmer always dressed like he'd stepped out of a Brooks Brothers catalog, always with that too white smile that never quite reached his eyes. I've been looking at those senior apartments in town, I said. Sarah shook her head, her blonde hair artificially maintained at the same shade she'd had in her 30s, swinging emphatically. Absolutely not. Mom, those places are depressing. Well, I can't stay here, and I won't be a burden. You'll come live with us, Sarah interrupted, reaching for my hand across her immaculate granite kitchen island. We have the guest cottage. It's perfect, close enough that we can check on you, but you'll still have your independence. I hesitated. The guest cottage was charming. A small one-bedroom structure behind their colonial-style home in Meadowbrook Estates, one of those upscale developments with manicured lawns and strict HOA regulations. Richard had shown it to me once when they first bought the place 3 years ago, explaining how they kept it for visiting family. That's very generous, but I insist, Sarah said, squeezing my hand. Emily will be away at college. It'll be good to have you close by. I looked at Richard, trying to gauge his reaction. His smile remained fixed, but something in his eyes made me uneasy. Of course, he said smoothly. Family takes care of family. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have recognized the calculation behind those words. But Sarah seemed so sincere, and the thought of being close to family as I aged was tempting. So I agreed, and 3 weeks later, I watched as the sold sign went up on my farmhouse. The couple who bought it, the Andersons, seemed nice enough. Young professionals with 2 small children eager to escape city life for a taste of country living. They paid a fair price, enough to cover Emily's college expenses with a little left over for my retirement. I told myself this was a blessing, a chance to start a new chapter. The day I moved into the guest cottage, Sarah had arranged everything beautifully. Fresh flowers on the small dining table, my favorite quilt spread across the bed, even Thomas's old armchair positioned by the window overlooking their backyard. It felt like a warm welcome, a promise that this transition would be smoother than I feared. This is perfect, I told Sarah, hugging her tightly. Thank you, sweetheart. "I'm just happy to have you close, Mom," she replied, her eyes misty with tears. "It's going to be wonderful." Behind her, Richard stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, that same fixed smile on his face. "Welcome home, Margaret," he said, and I wondered why the words sent a chill down my spine. Little did I know that day marked the beginning of my descent into a nightmare, one that would test my resolve, my intelligence, and my very will to fight back. Because the Richard Palmer who welcomed me with that practiced smile was not the man my daughter thought she'd married. He was something far more dangerous. And I was about to discover just how far he would go to get what he wanted. The first few months in the guest cottage were pleasant enough. I settled into a routine morning coffee on my small porch, afternoons volunteering at the local library, occasional dinners with Sarah and Richard. Emily came home for Thanksgiving, filling the main house with her infectious energy before heading back to college. I missed my farmhouse with its familiar creaks and the way the morning light filtered through the kitchen windows, but I reminded myself this was for Emily's future. When winter arrived, bringing with it a particularly harsh January, I noticed the first change in Richard's demeanor. It happened during a family dinner, as I was telling Emily about a book discussion group I'd joined at the library. "It's wonderful to see you staying active, Margaret," Richard interrupted, cutting into his roast beef with precise movements. "But I've been meaning to talk to you about the electricity bill." I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. "The electricity bill?" "Yes." Richard wiped his lips with his napkin. "All business now. We've noticed a significant increase since you moved in. The guest cottage isn't as energy efficient as we thought." Sarah looked uncomfortable. "Richard, it's not a big deal." "It's nearly $200 more per month, Sarah," he said firmly. "That adds up." I felt my cheeks grow warm with embarrassment. "I had no idea. Of course, I'll contribute to the utility." "That's not necessary, Mom," Sarah began, but Richard cut her off again. "Actually, that would be helpful, Margaret. Times are a bit tight with Emily's additional expenses not covered by your contribution." The way he said "your contribution" as if the money from selling my home of 50 years was a paltry offering made something twist inside me. But I smiled and nodded, unwilling to create tension. "Of course, I'll write you a check tomorrow." Richard's smile returned. "Perfect. Family helps family, right?" That night, alone in the cottage, I calculated my monthly expenses against my remaining savings and Social Security. The numbers weren't as comfortable as I'd hoped. The farm had sold for enough to cover Emily's tuition and housing, with what I thought would be a sufficient cushion for me. But between rising healthcare costs and now utilities, that cushion was thinning. What I didn't know then was that Richard had been watching my finances closely, calculating just how vulnerable I might become. The utility bill was just the beginning, his first test to see how easily I would acquiesce. By March, the guest cottage developed a persistent leak in the bathroom ceiling. Water stained the plaster, dripping steadily during heavy rains. I mentioned it to Sarah, who promised to have someone look at it. 2 weeks passed, the leak worsened. "I've called a contractor," Richard announced one evening when I came to the main house for dinner. "But unfortunately, they say the entire cottage roof needs to be replaced. It's going to take time, and it's not safe for you to stay there with the risk of mold and electrical issues." "Oh," I said, disappointed but not overly concerned. "I suppose I could look into a short-term rental while it's being fixed." Richard and Sarah exchanged glances. "Actually," Sarah said, her voice tentative, "we were thinking you could stay in the basement guest room, just temporarily." The basement. I'd seen it once, a partially finished space, with a small bedroom and bathroom tucked behind Richard's home office area. No windows, low ceilings, nothing like my sunny cottage. The basement, I repeated, trying to keep the dismay from my voice. It's just until the repairs are done, Sarah assured me, reaching for my hand. A few weeks at most. Richard nodded, all sympathetic efficiency. I've already started moving some of your essentials down there. The contractor begins work tomorrow. The speed of it all should have alarmed me. But Sarah looked so worried, so eager to make this work, that I couldn't bring myself to object. Well, if it's just for a few weeks, I conceded. That night, as I packed an overnight bag with trembling hands, I noticed a curious thing. The leak in the bathroom ceiling had stopped completely. Not slowed, stopped. I stood on a step stool and pressed my palm against the water-stained plaster. It was bone dry. Something wasn't right. But I told myself I was being paranoid, that grief and age were making me suspicious. Richard was successful, respected in the community. Sarah loved him. Why would he lie about something as trivial as a roof leak? I would learn the answer to that question all too soon, as days in the basement turned into weeks, weeks into months. With each passing day, I felt more isolated, more dependent, and increasingly invisible in what was supposed to be my new home. What I didn't realize was that Richard Palmer had made a career out of exactly this kind of calculated manipulation, and I was just his latest target. The basement room was exactly as I had feared, damp with that distinctive underground chill that never quite dissipates regardless of the season. A twin bed occupied one corner, my few possessions stacked in plastic containers along the wall. The bathroom was functional but basic, with a shower stall so small I banged my elbows every morning trying to wash my hair. "It's just temporary, Mom," Sarah reassured me whenever I asked about the cottage repairs. "The contractor found more damage than expected. These old structures, you know how it is." I did know how it was with old structures. Thomas had been a contractor himself before retirement, and I'd learned enough from him over the years to recognize when something didn't add up. But every time I suggested going to look at the cottage myself, Richard had a reason why I couldn't. "The whole area is roped off for safety. They're spraying for mold today. The insurance adjuster is coming, best not to interfere." After 6 weeks, I stopped asking. The basement had one small window near the ceiling, a ground-level rectangle that let in a meager amount of natural light. From my bed, I could see the feet of anyone walking by outside. Mostly Richard's polished loafers, Sarah's gardening clogs, occasionally the mail carrier's boots. These passing shadows became my calendar, my connection to the world above. What truly began to concern me wasn't just my living situation, but the subtle changes in Sarah. My once attentive daughter now seemed distracted, nervous when we were together. Our conversations felt scripted, as if she was holding something back. When I asked about Emily, she gave brief updates rather than the detailed reports she used to share. "Is everything all right, Sarah?" I asked one afternoon when she brought down my laundry. "Of course, Mom," she answered too quickly. "Why wouldn't it be? You seem different." Stressed. Sarah folded a towel with such precision it seemed like she was trying to solve a complex equation. "Richard's just busy at work. The investment firm is expanding, taking on new clients. It's a good thing, but it means longer hours." "And the cottage repairs?" Her hands stilled momentarily. coming along slowly but coming along. That night, I waited until the house was quiet. It was nearly midnight when I carefully climbed the basement stairs, wincing at each creak of the old wood. The door at the top wasn't locked. They hadn't gone that far yet, but I still felt like an intruder as I eased it open and stepped into the darkened kitchen. Moonlight spilled through the French doors, illuminating the granite countertops and stainless steel appliances of a kitchen that had never known a real home-cooked meal. Sarah was a takeout queen, her culinary skills limited to reheating and plating. I padded silently across the tiles, making my way toward the back door. Outside, the spring air felt intoxicating after weeks in the basement's stale atmosphere. I followed the stone path around the side of the house, toward where the guest cottage stood. As I rounded the corner, I stopped short, confusion washing over me. The cottage looked exactly as it had the day I moved out. No construction equipment, no scaffolding, no signs of any work being done. The lights were on inside, curtains drawn across the windows. Someone was in my cottage. Heart pounding, I crept closer, keeping to the shadows of the ornamental hedges Richard had installed last year. When I reached the cottage window, I carefully peered around the edge of the curtain through a small gap. Inside, my cottage had been transformed. My furniture was gone, replaced by a leather couch and matching armchairs. Where my dining table had stood was now a large desk with multiple computer monitors. And sitting at that desk, face illuminated by the screen's blue glow, was a man I'd never seen before, middle-aged, balding, focused intently on whatever he was viewing. I stifled a gasp, ducking back into the shadows. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There were no repairs happening. My cottage had been converted into some kind of office, and a stranger was using it in the middle of the night. As I turned to retreat back to the house, a motion sensor light flared to life, flooding the path with harsh brightness. I froze, exposed and vulnerable. "Mrs. Clark?" The deep voice came from behind me. I turned slowly to see the man from the cottage standing in the doorway. "I believe you're supposed to be in the basement." His calm statement, delivered with such casual authority, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the night air. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you doing in my cottage?" He smiled, not unkindly. "I think you'd better go back inside. Mr. Palmer wouldn't want you wandering around at night. It's not safe for someone your age." The condescension in his tone ignited a spark of anger that cut through my fear. "This is my property. I have every right." "No, Mrs. Clark," he interrupted, still smiling. "This is the Palmers' property, and I'm using this space with their permission." He gestured toward the main house. "I'd hate to have to wake Richard to discuss this." The threat was veiled but unmistakable. I looked from him to the cottage, my cottage, and then back to the silent house where my daughter slept, unaware of this midnight confrontation. "This isn't right," I said finally. "Many things aren't right, Mrs. Clark," he replied cryptically, "but that's how the world works. Now please return to your room before we have an unfortunate situation." I backed away, dignity in tatters but self-preservation instinct intact. As I retreated toward the house, his voice followed me softly. "And Mrs. Clark, this conversation never happened." Back in the basement, I sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling as I processed what I'd discovered. There were no repairs, no contractors. It had all been a lie to move me out of the cottage and into this basement prison. But who was that man, And what was Richard involved in that required secret midnight meetings? I didn't sleep that night, my mind spinning with questions and half-formed theories. By morning, one thing was clear: I needed answers and I needed help. But who could I trust? Sarah was under Richard's influence, Emily away at college. Most of my old friends had either passed away or moved to warmer climates. There was only one person I could think of: Howard Finch, my late husband's best friend and the attorney who had handled the sale of our farmhouse. Howard was retired now, but he'd always told me to call if I needed anything. As I lay in that basement bed, watching dawn's gray light filter through the small window, I made a decision. I would find a way to contact Howard, to escape the web Richard was weaving around me. What I didn't know then was how deep that web went, or how dangerous Richard Palmer truly was. I was about to discover that my son-in-law wasn't just a controlling, manipulative man. He was a predator who had made a fortune exploiting the elderly, and somehow I had become his latest target. The next morning, I made a point of acting normal, or as normal as one can act when they've discovered their living situation is based on elaborate lies. I ate the bran muffins Sarah brought down, thanked her warmly, and mentioned I might walk to the library later. The library? Sarah looked surprised. I hadn't left the house much in recent weeks. That's nearly 2 miles, Mom. The fresh air will do me good, I insisted. Doctor's orders to keep moving, remember? She hesitated, then nodded. I'll tell Richard. He worries about you walking alone. I bet he does, I thought, but smiled instead. No need to bother him. I know he's busy. As soon as Sarah left for her volunteer shift at the hospital gift shop, I put my plan into action. I changed into my walking shoes, tucked my cell phone and wallet into my purse, and headed upstairs. The house was quiet. Richard supposedly at work, the cleaning lady not due until tomorrow. I made it to the front door without incident, but as I reached for the handle, a voice stopped me cold. Going somewhere, Margaret? Richard stood in the doorway to his home office, watching me with that practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Just to the library, I said, forcing brightness into my voice. Sarah mentioned I'd be going. Did she? He checked his watch, a Rolex, ostentatious and gleaming. Interesting. She didn't mention it to me. Well, I just decided this morning, I replied, hand still on the doorknob. The fresh air will do me good. Richard nodded slowly, then stepped fully into the hallway. You know, I've been meaning to talk to you about your activities. The doctor mentioned after your last checkup that we should be monitoring your independence. My checkup? I hadn't seen a doctor in months, and certainly not with Richard present. I don't recall any doctor saying that, I said carefully. Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Memory issues are nothing to be ashamed of, Margaret. It happens at your age. Sarah and I have been concerned for some time. The insinuation was clear and chilling. Richard was laying groundwork, creating a narrative of an elderly woman with failing memory and judgment. My memory is perfectly fine, I stated firmly. Now, if you'll excuse me, the library closes at 5. I opened the door, but Richard moved quickly, placing his hand flat against it and pushing it closed again. I insist you take my car service, he said. I'll have Dennis drive you, much safer than walking. That's not necessary. I insist, Richard repeated, already pulling out his phone. Dennis can be here in 10 minutes. Why don't you wait in the sitting room? I'll bring you some tea. It wasn't a suggestion. The hand on the door, the unwavering stare, the careful monitoring of my movements, all made it clear that I wasn't going anywhere without supervision. I recognized I was outmaneuvered, at least for the moment. Fine, I conceded, moving toward the formal sitting room that Sarah kept immaculate but never used. Tea would be lovely. Richard's shoulders relaxed slightly. He thought he had won this round, and perhaps he had, but the confrontation only strengthened my resolve to contact Howard. The car service turned out to be a hulking man named Dennis, who looked more like a bodyguard than a driver. He escorted me to the library, then made it clear he would wait and drive me home afterward. I had no privacy to use the library phone, and Dennis positioned himself where he could see me throughout the building. I checked out 2 mystery novels, made small talk with the librarian I knew from my volunteer work, and pretended this was a normal outing. But inside, my mind was working overtime. I needed to find a way to contact Howard without Richard knowing. My opportunity came 3 days later when Sarah mentioned she needed to do grocery shopping. "I'll come with you," I suggested. "I could use a few personal items." She looked uncertain. "Richard usually has groceries delivered." "I know, but I miss picking out my own produce. Remember how your father always insisted on squeezing the avocados himself?" I smiled at the memory, watching her face soften. "He was so particular," she agreed, a genuine smile breaking through her usual worried expression. "Okay, we'll go together. Like old times." At the supermarket, I waited until Sarah was engrossed in selecting the perfect rotisserie chicken before making my move. I told her I needed to use the restroom and slipped away toward the store's customer service desk where I knew they had a public phone. With shaking fingers, I dialed Howard's number from memory, praying he still had the same line. After 3 rings, his familiar gravelly voice answered. "Howard Finch speaking." "Howard," I whispered, glancing over my shoulder to ensure Sarah wasn't approaching. "It's Margaret Clark. I need help." "Margaret?" His surprise was evident. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said, keeping my voice low. "I can't talk long. My son-in-law, something's wrong. He's isolated me, lied about repairs to move me into the basement. There was a strange man using my cottage at night." "Slow down," Howard said, his tone shifting from surprise to concerned. "Where are you now?" "Henderson's supermarket on Maple Street." "I'm with my daughter, but I don't have much time. Howard, I think Richard is up to something illegal. Can you meet me?" There was a pause, then, "I'll be at Riverside Park tomorrow at 2 p.m. by the duck pond. Can you get there?" "I'll find a way," I promised. "Be careful, Margaret. Don't confront him until we've talked." I spotted Sarah turning from the deli counter, scanning the store for me. "I have to go." "Tomorrow at 2. Thank you, Howard." I hung up and hurried toward the restrooms, emerging just as Sarah rounded the corner. "There you are," she said, relieved. I was getting worried. "Sorry, dear. At my age, when nature calls, it's not a suggestion," I joked, hating the deception but knowing it was necessary. That night, lying in my basement bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Howard would help me make sense of what was happening. Howard would know what to do. What I didn't realize was that my brief phone call had set in motion events that would not only expose Richard Palmer's schemes, but would ultimately threaten my relationship with my daughter, my freedom, and perhaps even my life, because Richard Palmer hadn't built his fortune by allowing loose ends, and in his eyes, that's exactly what I had become. Getting to Riverside Park the next day proved more challenging than I anticipated. Richard had implemented a new safety measure. The basement door now had a deadbolt lock on the outside. He presented it as concern for my well-being. "We noticed you sleepwalking, Margaret," he explained over breakfast, as Sarah nodded in solemn agreement. "We're worried you might fall down the stairs at night." The lock meant I couldn't leave the basement without someone letting me out. I was essentially imprisoned in my own daughter's home. "I've never sleepwalked in my life," I protested. "Memory issues again," Richard said to Sarah with a meaningful look. "Dr. Hansen mentioned this might happen." This fictional Dr. Hansen was becoming a convenient authority for whatever restrictions Richard wanted to impose. Sarah, whether from genuine concern or willful blindness, accepted everything her husband said without question. I needed to change tactics. Direct confrontation clearly wasn't working. "You know," I said, carefully stirring my oatmeal, "you're right. I did have a strange episode last night. I thought I was back at the farmhouse looking for Thomas in the barn." Sarah's eyes widened with concern. "Oh, Mom, it's disconcerting," I continued, injecting vulnerability into my voice. "Maybe I should see Dr. Hansen again." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. He hadn't expected this pivot. "I could make an appointment," Sarah offered. "Actually," I said, "I was thinking of that nice park program the library recommended. For seniors with memory concerns, it's at Riverside Park, I believe. Today at 2 p.m. Richard exchanged a look with Sarah that I couldn't interpret. "A park program?" he questioned. "I haven't heard of this." "The librarian mentioned it when I was there," I improvised. "Gentle exercise, memory games, social interaction, all the things Dr. Hansen recommends, right?" Richard studied me for a long moment. I held his gaze, projecting innocent enthusiasm. "I suppose fresh air would be good for you," he finally conceded. "I'll have Dennis drive you." Perfect. Now I just needed to find a way to speak with Howard privately while under Dennis's watchful eye. When we arrived at Riverside Park, Dennis parked near the main entrance. "I'll escort you to this burrow," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable. "It's by the duck pond," I informed him, scanning the area for any sign of Howard. "And look, there's a group gathering already." Indeed, there was a small cluster of seniors near the pond, though I had no idea if they were part of an actual program or just enjoying the spring day. Dennis walked me toward them, maintaining a respectful but vigilant distance. As we approached, I spotted Howard seated on a bench slightly apart from the group, pretending to read a newspaper. He looked up as we neared, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Dennis looming behind me. "Margaret," a voice called out. I turned to see Eleanor Jenkins, a woman I knew from my library volunteering days, waving enthusiastically from the group. "Are you joining our Tai Chi class?" "Tai Chi class? Perfect." "Yes," I called back with equal enthusiasm. "My first time." Dennis frowned. "I thought this was a memory program." "Tai Chi is excellent for mind-body connection," I explained smoothly. "It's all part of the cognitive health regimen." Eleanor approached, smiling warmly. "We're so glad you could join us. The class runs about an hour." Dennis shifted uncomfortably. "I'm supposed to stay with Mrs. Clark." "Oh, are you her son?" Eleanor asked innocently. "Driver," Dennis grunted. "Well, you're welcome to join us," Eleanor offered, though most caregivers prefer to relax while we're in session. "There's a lovely cafe just across the park." I could have hugged Eleanor for this unwitting assistance. Dennis looked torn between his instructions and the awkwardness of joining a senior Tai Chi class. "I'll be fine," I assured him. Why don't you get yourself a coffee? I'll be right here with the group. After a moment's hesitation, Dennis nodded. 1 hour, he said firmly. I'll be watching from the cafe. As he walked away, I turned to Eleanor. Thank you for that. Is it all right if I join your class? Of course. The more the merrier. We start in about 15 minutes. As Eleanor returned to the group, I casually made my way to Howard's bench. He folded his newspaper as I approached. That's your driver? He asked quietly as I sat beside him. More like my jailer, I replied. We don't have much time. He'll be watching from the cafe. Howard nodded, his weathered face serious. Tell me everything, Margaret. In hurried whispers, I recounted the past months, the basement relocation, the mysterious man in my cottage, Richard's increasing control over my movements, and the disturbing suggestions about my mental capacity. Howard listened intently, his frown deepening with each detail. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, processing. This is troubling, Margaret, he finally said. Very troubling. It sounds like classic elder abuse, possibly financial exploitation. But why? I asked. I've already given them the money from the farmhouse sale for Emily's education. What more could Richard want? Howard's expression was grim. I've been hearing rumors about Richard Palmer for years, but nothing concrete. His investment firm caters exclusively to seniors with significant assets. Several of his clients have experienced similar situations, moving in with, gradually losing control of their finances, eventually being declared incompetent. My blood ran cold. You think that's his plan for me, to have me declared incompetent? It's a possibility we need to consider. The pattern fits. Howard glanced toward the cafe where Dennis was indeed watching us. We need to act quickly. Do you have any documentation, any proof of what's happening? I shook my head. Just my word against his. And he's been very careful to involve Sarah in everything, making it seem like they're both concerned about my welfare. Your cottage, you said there was a man using it at night? Any idea what for? I only got a glimpse. Multiple computer screens. Looked like some kind of office setup. Howard's eyebrows rose. Interesting. Could be running some kind of boiler room operation. These investment schemes often involve high-pressure sales tactics, falsified documents. The Tai Chi instructor was calling the class to order. I glanced nervously toward the cafe. Dennis was stirring his coffee, eyes still fixed on our bench. I need to join the class or he'll get suspicious, I whispered. What should I do, Howard? He slipped a small flip phone into my hand. Burner phone. My number is programmed in. Keep it hidden. If things escalate, call me immediately. He hesitated, then added, and Margaret, try to get into Richard's home office if you can. Look for client files, anything with your name on it. We need evidence. I tucked the phone into my pocket, heart racing. I'll try. Be careful, Howard warned. Men like Richard Palmer don't respond well to threats to their operations. If he suspects you're on to him, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication was clear. I was in danger perhaps more than I realized. As I joined the Tai Chi class, attempting to mimic Eleanor's graceful movements while my mind churned with fear and determination, I couldn't help but wonder how my comfortable retirement had transformed into this nightmare of manipulation and deceit. But one thing was becoming crystal clear. If Richard Palmer thought this elderly widow would quietly surrender to his schemes, he was about to learn a painful lesson about underestimating the wrong grandmother. That evening, back in my basement room, I sat on the edge of the bed, contemplating Howard's warnings. The small flip phone felt like both a lifeline and a dangerous secret as I tucked it beneath my mattress. If Richard found it, I had no doubt the consequences would be severe. The deadbolt on my door clicked open, and Sarah appeared with a tray. "I brought you some dinner, Mom." "How was the park program?" "Lovely," I said, forcing enthusiasm. The Tai Chi was so relaxing. Sarah set the tray on my small table: soup, half a sandwich, and a small cup of applesauce. Child's portions. I'd lost weight in recent months, my clothes hanging looser, but Sarah hadn't seemed to notice. "Tai Chi?" She looked confused. "Richard mentioned it was a memory exercise group." "It's both," I said quickly. "Movement and memory work together." The instructor explained it all. Sarah nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. She hovered awkwardly, as if wanting to say something more. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" I prompted. She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "Richard and I have been towing about your living situation." My stomach tightened. "Oh?" "The cottage repairs are going to take much longer than expected." "Structural issues, apparently?" She couldn't quite meet my eyes. "And this basement room isn't ideal for long-term?" "I couldn't agree more," I said carefully. "So Richard's found a wonderful place. Sunset Meadows Assisted Living. It's not too far from here, and they have excellent care for people with your needs." My needs? As if aging had transformed me into someone with special requirements, someone incapable of independent living. "I don't need assisted living, Sarah," I said firmly. "I was managing just fine in my cottage." "Mom, you haven't been fine for a while now." Sarah's voice took on a rehearsed quality, as if reciting lines she'd practiced. "The forgetfulness, the confusion about where you are sometimes. Richard's concerned, and frankly, so am I." "What forgetfulness? What confusion?" I demanded. "Sarah, I've never been confused about where I am. That's complete nonsense." She sighed, looking pained. "See, this is exactly what Dr. Hansen warned us about. You don't remember your episodes. Last week you thought you were back at the farmhouse looking for Dad in the barn. You told us yourself." I closed my eyes briefly, cursing my earlier strategy. My attempt to appear compliant had backfired spectacularly, providing Richard with more evidence of my supposed decline. "Sarah, listen to me carefully. I am perfectly lucid. There is nothing wrong with my memory or my mind. Richard is manipulating you, manipulating this entire situation." Her expression hardened. "Richard has done nothing but try to help. He's the one who found Sunset Meadows, who's arranged for a spot to open up for you next week." "Next week?" I interrupted, alarm shooting through me. "You're planning to move me that quickly?" "It's a wonderful opportunity. Those places usually have waiting lists months long. Richard had to pull some strings." "I bet he did," I thought bitterly. Aloud, I tried another approach. "Sweetheart, have you visited this place yourself? Seen the facilities, talked to the residents?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Well, no, but Richard says." "Richard says," I repeated, trying to keep the frustration from my voice. "Sarah, has it occurred to you that Richard might not have your best interests or mine at heart?" Sarah's expression clouded. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating it plainly. Richard has been lying to you. There are no repairs happening at the cottage. I saw it myself. It's being used as some kind of office. A man I've never seen before was working there late at night. Sarah's face paled slightly, but she quickly recovered. That's impossible. The cottage is under construction. Richard showed me the contractor estimates himself. Estimates can be fabricated, Sarah. When was the last time you actually looked inside the cottage? She hesitated, and I knew I'd hit on something. Richard said it wasn't safe because of the mold. There is no mold. There are no repairs. There's only Richard, systematically isolating me and now trying to ship me off to a facility where I'll be completely under his control. Sarah stood abruptly, her face flushed. You don't know what you're saying. This is exactly why we're concerned. These paranoid delusions. They're not delusions if they're true, I countered. Go look in the cottage yourself. Right now. I'll wait here. I'm not going to dignify this with, if I'm wrong, what's the harm? Go look. Prove me wrong. For a moment, I thought I'd reached her. Something flickered in her eyes, doubt perhaps, but then her expression hardened. I'm going to call Dr. Hansen. You're clearly having some kind of episode. With that, she collected my barely touched dinner tray and left the room. The deadbolt clicked into place behind her. I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My own daughter believed I was experiencing dementia rather than consider her husband might be lying. The betrayal cut deep, but I couldn't afford to wallow in hurt feelings. I needed to act, and fast. Reaching under the mattress, I retrieved Howard's phone. My hands trembled as I dialed. Margaret, Howard answered on the first ring. Are you all right? They're planning to move me to an assisted living facility next week, I whispered, keeping my voice low in case anyone was listening at the door. Richard's convinced Sarah I'm experiencing dementia. I tried to tell her about the cottage, but she didn't believe me. Howard swore under his breath. This is escalating faster than I anticipated. Margaret, I need to be frank with you. Based on what you've told me and what I've been able to piece together about Richard's operation, I'm concerned this assisted living facility might be part of his scheme. What do you mean? Several of Richard's elderly clients ended up in care facilities where they were heavily medicated, declared incompetent, and had their finances taken over by court-appointed guardians who just happened to be associates of Richard Palmer. A chill ran down my spine. You think that's his plan for me? But why? I've already given them the money from the farmhouse. The farmhouse sale is just the beginning. You must have other assets he's aware of. Retirement accounts, life insurance, investments. I thought of Thomas's life insurance policy that I'd never touched. The retirement accounts we built over decades of careful saving. Not a fortune by any means, but substantial enough. Yes, I admitted, but those are all in my name. He can't access them. Not without power of attorney or being appointed your guardian, Howard said grimly, which would explain the sudden concern about your mental competence. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture more sinister than I'd imagined. Richard wasn't just trying to control me, he was systematically working to strip me of my legal rights, my assets, and ultimately, my freedom. What can I do? I asked, fear giving way to determination. We need evidence, Howard replied. Concrete proof of his schemes. Without it, it's your word against his, and he's already undermined your credibility with Sarah. The cottage, I said suddenly. If I could get photos of what's happening there, proof there are no renovations, that would be a start, but we need more. Client files, financial records, anything that shows a pattern of exploitation. I thought of Richard's home office, always locked when he wasn't there. His office might have what we need, but I can't get in. The door stays locked. Does Sarah have access? I doubt it. Richard keeps his business completely separate from her. Howard was silent for a moment, thinking, "We need to move quickly. I'm going to file an emergency petition for protection from elder abuse with the court tomorrow morning. It won't stop them immediately, but it will buy us some time. And if that doesn't work..." I couldn't keep the fear from my voice. "Then we go to the authorities. Financial exploitation of the elderly is a crime, Margaret. But we need proof first." After hanging up, I sat in the dim basement light, contemplating my options. The walls seemed to close in around me, a physical manifestation of the trap Richard had constructed. I thought of my daughter upstairs, completely taken in by her husband's lies. I thought of Emily, away at college, unaware that her mother and grandfather were pawns in Richard's elaborate game. I'd spent my entire life being responsible, cautious, following the rules. But now, those same rules were being used against me, twisted to serve Richard's agenda. If I was going to fight back, if I was going to save not just myself, but potentially Sarah and Emily too, I needed to take risks. The next morning, Sarah brought down my breakfast tray, her manner cool and distant. She'd clearly spoken to Richard about our conversation. "Richard's arranged for us to tour Sunset Meadows today," she announced, not meeting my eyes. "The car will be here at 10. I nodded, deciding to appear compliant. "I'd like to freshen up before we go. Could I use the main bathroom upstairs? The shower down here has been running cold." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "I suppose that would be fine. I'll help you up in about an hour." Perfect. The main bathroom was directly across from Richard's office. If I was going to find evidence, this might be my only chance. True to her word, Sarah came down an hour later to escort me upstairs. The house was quiet, Richard's presumably at work. She led me to the guest bathroom, handing me a fresh towel. "Take your time," she said. "I'll be in the kitchen." As soon as I heard her footsteps recede, I turned on the shower for cover noise and slipped out of the bathroom. Richard's office door loomed across the hallway, mahogany with a brass handle, always locked. Except today, it wasn't. The door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of morning light spilling through the gap. My heart raced. This was either incredible luck or a trap, but I couldn't afford to waste the opportunity. Glancing down the hallway to ensure Sarah wasn't coming, I quickly crossed to the office and slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind me. Richard's sanctuary was exactly what you'd expect. Dark wood furniture, leather chairs, a large desk dominated by a sleek computer. Built-in bookshelves held leather-bound volumes that looked untouched, there for appearance rather than use. Moving quickly, I began opening desk drawers. The first two contained standard office supplies, pens, paper clips, notepads. The third was locked. Interesting. I scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. On a credenza behind the desk sat a framed photo of Richard, Sarah, and Emily at Emily's high school graduation. Beside it, a small decorative box caught my eye, mother of pearl inlay too delicate for Richard's taste. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. When I lifted the lid, I found what I was looking for, a small key. With trembling fingers, I tried the key in the locked drawer. It turned smoothly, and the drawer slid open to reveal a stack of file folders. I pulled them out, spreading them on the desk. Each was labeled with a name: Johnson, Martinez, Whitaker. Clark. My file. I opened it, heart pounding. Inside were documents I recognized: the deed to my farmhouse, insurance policies, bank statements. But there were also documents I'd never seen before: medical reports from the fictional Doc Hansen detailing cognitive assessments I'd never undergone, declining MMSE scores that had never been measured, recommendations for supervised care that had never been made. And something else, a petition for guardianship, already filled out but not yet filed, stating that Margaret Clark, was suffering from dementia and required a court-appointed guardian to manage my affairs. Richard had named himself as the proposed guardian. My hands shook with anger and fear as I pulled out my phone, not the burner from Howard, but my regular cell phone. I quickly photographed each document, making sure to capture the fabricated medical reports, the guardianship petition, everything that proved Richard's deception. I was so focused on documenting the evidence that I almost missed the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Quickly, I shoved the files back into the drawer, locked it, and returned the key to the decorative box. The footsteps paused outside the door. Thinking fast, I moved to the window, pretending to admire the view. The door opened. "Mom, what are you doing in here?" Sarah stood in the doorway, confusion and suspicion battling on her face. "The bathroom was too steamy," I improvised. "I needed some air." The door was open, so I thought it would be all right to step in for a moment. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Richard never leaves his office unlocked." "Well, he must have today," I said with a shrug. "I was just looking at your garden. The rhododendrons are blooming beautifully." Sarah didn't look convinced, but she nodded toward the hallway. "The car for Sunset Meadows will be here soon. You should finish getting ready." "Of course." I moved toward the door, trying to appear casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. Had she noticed anything amiss? Would she tell Richard? Back in the bathroom, I turned off the shower and leaned against the sink, breathing deeply to calm myself. The evidence on my phone confirmed everything Howard had suspected and worse. Richard wasn't just isolating me. He was actively fabricating a case for my mental incompetence, creating a paper trail that would give him control over everything I owned. I needed to get this information to Howard immediately. But first, I had to survive this tour of Sunset Meadows without arousing further suspicion. An hour later, Sarah and I sat in the back of a town car, driving toward what Richard had described as one of the premier assisted living communities in the state. Neither of us spoke much during the journey, a tense silence hanging between us. As we pulled up to Sunset Meadows, I had to admit the exterior was impressive. A sprawling, modern building surrounded by manicured gardens and walking paths. It looked more like a luxury hotel than a care facility. A woman in a crisp suit greeted us at the entrance. "Mrs. Palmer, so lovely to meet you, and this must be your mother. I'm Director Larson. Richard has told me so much about you, Mrs. Clark." I bet he has, I thought, but smiled politely. "Lovely to meet you. We're so excited to show you our community. Richard mentioned you've been experiencing some memory challenges, but I want to assure you that our memory care unit provides the highest level of support while maintaining dignity and quality of life." Memory care unit, not just assisted living, but a secure wing designed for dementia patients, the kind of place where residents couldn't leave without staff permission, where medications were administered whether you wanted them or not, where your every movement was monitored and controlled. My smile remained fixed, but inside a cold determination took hold. I would not end up here, no matter what. The tour proceeded exactly as I expected, showcasing spacious common areas, describing engaging activities, emphasizing safety features. Director Larson spoke about me in the third person, addressing all substantive information to Sarah as if I were already incapable of understanding. Our memory care residents receive personalized care plans, and we administer all medications on schedule, she explained to Sarah. No need to worry about missed doses or confusion. That sounds wonderful, Sarah replied, clearly impressed. Mom's been increasingly forgetful about her medications. I had never forgotten a single dose of my blood pressure medication in my life, but I held my tongue. As we approached the memory care unit, I noticed the subtle security features, keypad entries, monitors at nursing stations, doors that could only be opened with staff assistance, a beautiful prison designed to keep its residents contained while family members could comfort themselves that their loved ones were receiving the highest level of care. We have a lovely corner suite available next week, Director Larson continued, unlocking a door to reveal a small but well-appointed room with a hospital-style bed and sanitized furnishings. Richard has already put down the deposit, but of course, we wanted you both to see it first. Sarah turned to me, her expression a mixture of hope and guilt. What do you think, Mom? It's really nice, isn't it? I looked around the room, imagining myself confined here, medicated into compliance, my assets gradually drained away through care fees while Richard managed everything else. I thought of the fabricated medical reports, the guardianship petition waiting to be filed, the systematic dismantling of my independence. Then I thought of my evidence safely documented on my phone, of Howard filing emergency protective orders, of the life I'd built and wasn't ready to relinquish. It seems very institutional, I said carefully. Oh, we work hard to create a home-like environment, Director Larson interjected quickly. Residents are encouraged to bring personal items, family photos. Within reason, of course, she added. We need to maintain safety standards. I nodded, continuing my performance of polite consideration. And visitors? Are they allowed at any time? We have designated visiting hours, Director Larson explained, though family can arrange special visits with advance notice. Controlled access, even for family. I wondered if Richard had already arranged to be my only approved visitor. Well, it's certainly given me a lot to think about, I said, injecting the right note of grateful consideration into my voice. Wonderful, Director Larson beamed. Most of our new residents feel a bit overwhelmed at first, but they adjust beautifully, and with Richard handling all the paperwork and transition details, you won't have to worry about a thing. I'm sure I won't, I thought grimly. As we left Sunset Meadows, I maintained my facade of mild interest and consideration. Sarah seemed relieved by my apparent acceptance, chattering about the activities and amenities as we drove home. Director Larson mentioned they can have you moved in as early as Tuesday, she said, checking her calendar on her phone. Richard's handled all the financial arrangements. Tuesday, 5 days away, the timeline was accelerating. I needed to act now. Back at the house, I excused myself to rest in my basement room, claiming the tour had tired me out. As soon as the deadbolt clicked into place, I retrieved the burner phone and called Howard. I have evidence, I whispered, describing what I'd found in Richard's office. Medical reports for examinations that never happened, a guardianship petition ready to file, and they're planning to move me to a memory care facility on Tuesday. This is worse than I thought. Howard said, his voice tight with concern. "Can you send me the photos you took?" "Not from this phone, but I have them on my regular cell." "We need to get you out of there immediately," Howard decided. "I've filed the emergency protective order, but the hearing isn't until Monday. That may be too late if they're moving this quickly." "What should I do?" I asked, fear and determination warring within me. "I'm coming to get you tonight," Howard said firmly. "Pack whatever you can carry inconspicuously. I'll be parked down the street at 11 p.m. Can you get out of the basement?" I thought of the deadbolt, the locked cottage, the watchful eyes of Richard and now Sarah. "I'm not sure. They've started locking me in at night." Howard was silent for a moment. "Is there a window? Any other exit?" "There's a small window near the ceiling," I said, looking up at the rectangular opening that provided my only natural light. "But it's too small for me to fit through, and it has security bars." "What about during the day? Are you ever left alone in the house?" I considered the household rhythms. "Sarah usually volunteers at the hospital on Friday afternoons. That's tomorrow. Richard's at work until evening. But they'll probably have Dennis watching the house." "Dennis?" "The driver who escorted me to the park. He works for Richard." Howard's voice hardened with resolve. "Tomorrow afternoon, then. I'll handle Dennis. Just be ready to leave at 2 p.m. And Margaret? Bring only what you absolutely need. We may not have much time." After ending the call, I sat on the edge of my bed, heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. This was really happening. I was planning an escape from my own daughter's home, fleeing a son-in-law who intended to declare me incompetent and steal my assets. How had it come to this? I thought of Sarah, so thoroughly convinced of Richard's good intentions that she was willing to commit her own mother to a memory care facility based on fabricated evidence. I thought of Emily, unaware of what was happening, her education funded by the sale of my beloved farmhouse. Would Sarah ever forgive me for what I was about to do? Would she ever see Richard for what he who was? I didn't know. But I did know that if I didn't act now, I might never get another chance. That night, I slept fitfully, my dreams filled with locked doors and endless institutional corridors. In the morning, Sarah brought my breakfast as usual, her manner slightly warmer after what she perceived as my cooperative attitude at Sunset Meadows. "Richard's very pleased you're being so reasonable about this transition," she said, setting down a tray with oatmeal and tea. "He says it's the best decision for everyone." "I'm sure he does," I thought, but managed a wan smile. I'd been thinking a lot about it. Change is hard at my age. Sarah patted my hand. "I know, Mom, but you'll be safe there, with professional care, and we'll visit all the time." The lie came easily from her lips. Would they visit all the time once I was safely warehoused, my assets under Richard's control? I doubted it. "Will you be at the hospital today?" I asked casually, stirring my oatmeal. "Yes, my usual Friday shift. Why?" "Just wondering if I should expect dinner down here or if we'd be eating together." Sarah looked momentarily guilty. "Richard mentioned he might bring something back for us. I'll make sure he brings enough for you, too." "That would be lovely," I said, the picture of docile gratitude. Sarah hesitated at the door. "Mom, are you sure you're feeling all right? You seem different." For a moment, I considered telling her everything, the evidence I'd found, Howard's suspicions, my bland escape. But looking at her face, I saw not my daughter, but Richard's wife, a woman who had already chosen her allegiance. "Just tired," I assured her, "and perhaps a little anxious about the move." She nodded, seemingly satisfied, and left me to my breakfast, the deadbolt remaining unlocked since she expected be in and out of the house all morning. The hours crawled by. I packed as Howard had instructed, just essentials in a small bag I could easily carry. My medications, a change of clothes, the few pieces of jewelry I'd kept with me rather than storing in the cottage. I tucked both phones into my pocket and waited, counting minutes, listening for sounds from upstairs. Around noon, I heard Sarah call down, "Mom, I'm heading to the hospital now. Richard ordered lunch for you. It's in the refrigerator if you want to come up. I'll be back around 6. "Thank you, dear," I called back. "Have a good day." The front door closed, followed by the sound of Sarah's car starting and pulling away. I waited 10 more minutes, heart pounding, before slowly ascending the basement stairs. The main floor was silent and sun-dappled. Through the front windows, I could see Dennis's car parked across the street, Richard's watchdog making sure I didn't wander off. I moved to the kitchen, making a show of opening the refrigerator and removing the salad Sarah had mentioned in case Dennis was watching the house. Then I settled at the kitchen table, eating slowly, projecting the image of an elderly woman enjoying a quiet lunch. Time ticked by with excruciating slowness. 1 p.m., 1:30. I washed my dishes, put them away, pretended to read a magazine at the kitchen table where Dennis could see me through the window if he was watching. At 1:55, I returned to the basement, retrieved my small bag, and came back up tears. My pulse was racing, my mouth dry with anxiety. Howard would be arriving any minute, but how would he distract Dennis? How would I get out of the house without being seen? The answer came at exactly 2:00 p.m. in the form of a loud crash from the street outside. I rushed to the window to see that a delivery truck had apparently backed into Dennis's parked car. The driver was out, gesticulating wildly. Dennis had emerged from his vehicle, his attention completely focused on the damage to his rear bumper. My opportunity had arrived. Moving quickly, I slipped out the back door and hurried across the yard, keeping low and using the landscaping as cover. Howard had said he'd be parked down the street. I just needed to make it off the property without Dennis spotting me. At the edge of the yard, I ducked through a gap in the hedge and found myself on the neighboring property. I kept moving, cutting through backyards, staying out of sight of the street. My heart pounded, my breath came in short gasps, but adrenaline kept me going. 3 houses down, I finally reached a side street perpendicular to the main road, and there, as promised, was Howard's blue sedan, engine running, Howard behind the wheel scanning the surroundings anxiously. I hurried to the passenger side and slipped in. "Go," I gasped. Howard didn't need to be told twice. He pulled away smoothly, not too fast to attract attention, but with clear purpose. In the side mirror, I could see Dennis still engaged with the delivery driver, completely unaware that his charge had just escaped. "Are you all right?" Howard asked, glancing at me with concern as we turned onto the main road heading away from Meadowbrook Estates. "Yes," I managed, my heart still racing. "That delivery truck, was that your doing?" Howard smiled grimly. "My nephew Marcus, brilliant boy, very convincing as a distracted delivery driver." I sagged against the seat, relief washing over me in waves. "Thank you, Howard. I don't know what I would have done without you." "Don't thank me yet," he cautioned. "We're not in the clear. Richard will discover you're missing soon enough and he won't take it lightly." "Where are we going?" "My lake house. It's remote, under my daughter's name, not connected to me in any obvious way. We'll be safe there while we build our case. As we drove out of town, leaving behind the neighborhood where my life had become a carefully constructed prison, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at my escape, fear of what might come next, and a deep aching sadness for the relationship with my daughter that might never recover from this breach. But beneath it all was a steely determination. Richard Palmer had chosen the wrong elderly widow to victimize. He thought he was dealing with a helpless old woman who would quietly surrender her autonomy, her assets, and her dignity. Instead, he'd awakened a fighter who wouldn't rest until justice was served, not just for herself, but for every vulnerable senior he had exploited. The game had changed. Richard Palmer just didn't know it yet. Howard's lake house was a modest cedar cabin nestled among pine trees, overlooking a small, secluded lake about an hour outside the city. As we pulled up the gravel driveway, I felt some of the tension leave my body. There were no neighbors visible, no traffic sounds, just the wind in the trees and distant calls of waterbirds. "It's not fancy," Howard apologized as he carried my bag inside, "but it's comfortable, and more importantly, it's safe." The interior was exactly what you'd expect of a bachelor's vacation home: functional furniture, a stone fireplace, fishing gear stacked neatly in one corner. But it was clean and warm, with large windows framing views of the lake. "It's perfect," I assured him, sinking gratefully onto the leather sofa. Now that the immediate danger had passed, exhaustion washed over me. I hadn't realized how much energy fear had been consuming. Howard busied himself making coffee, giving me space to decompress. "I've contacted a colleague who specializes in elder law and financial exploitation cases," he said over the burble of the coffee maker. "She'll be joining us tomorrow to review your evidence and discuss options." I nodded, pulling out my cell phone. "I should send these photos to you now." "Use this instead," Howard said, handing me a laptop. "More secure. We'll upload the photos, and then I recommend turning off your regular phone. Richard could potentially track it." As I transferred the damning images from my phone, Howard continued outlining his plans. "The emergency protective order hearing is still scheduled for Monday. With this new evidence, I'm confident the judge will grant it. That will legally prevent Richard from filing for guardianship or moving you to Sunset Meadows." "And then what?" I asked. "Richard still has Sarah convinced I'm losing my mind. My cottage is still being used for whatever scheme he's running." Howard's expression turned grim. "Then we go after him, hard. These documents you found aren't just evidence of a plan to exploit you. They're proof of fraud, forgery of medical documents, potentially conspiracy, and if we can prove he's done this to others, criminal charges," I concluded. "Exactly, but first we need to make sure you're legally protected." Howard handed me a mug of coffee and sat across from me. "Margaret, I need to ask you something difficult. Have you considered that Sarah might be involved in this scheme?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Involved? No. Manipulated? Yes. But Sarah wouldn't knowingly participate in exploiting me. Howard nodded, looking relieved. "That's my assessment too, based on what you've described. Richard has been very careful to make everything appear to be motivated by concern for your welfare. Sarah believes she's acting in your best interest. She's always been easily influenced by strong personalities," I said, memories of Sarah's childhood rushing back. Even as a little girl, she would go along with whatever her more assertive friends wanted, afraid of disapproval. And now she's married to a master manipulator, Howard observed. Someone who's made a career out of exploiting vulnerability. I stared into my coffee, the reality of my situation settling heavily on my shoulders. She'll be devastated when she discovers the truth. First, when I disappeared, and then when Richard's crimes come to light. Would you rather go back? Howard asked gently. Pretend you never found those documents. Let Richard proceed with his plans? No, I said firmly, straightening my spine. Sarah needs to know the truth, no matter how painful. And Richard needs to be stopped, not just for my sake, but for all the other vulnerable seniors he's targeted. Howard's phone rang, interrupting our conversation. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. It's Sarah, he said, showing me the caller ID. That was fast, I murmured. They must have discovered I'm missing. Do you want me to answer? I hesitated, torn between the desire to reassure my daughter and the knowledge that any contact could potentially reveal my location. Put it on speaker, I decided, but don't tell her I'm with you. Howard nodded, accepting the call. Howard Finch speaking. Mr. Finch, this is Sarah Palmer. Her voice was tight with anxiety. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm trying to locate my mother, Margaret Clark. She's missing from our home, and I'm very concerned. She's been having cognitive issues, and I'm worried she's wandered off and might be confused or lost. The practiced speech, so similar to the narrative in Richard's falsified documents, made my blood boil, but I remained silent as Howard responded with perfect professional concern. Mrs. Palmer, this is certainly worrying news. When did you last see your mother? I left for my hospital volunteer shift around noon. When I returned home at 6, she was gone. Her room was empty, and some of her clothes are missing. Have you contacted the police? Howard asked. Richard has. They've issued a silver alert. Sarah's voice broke slightly. Mr. Finch, I remembered you handled the sale of Mom's farmhouse. I thought perhaps she might have contacted you or tried to go back to the farm. I haven't heard from your mother today, Howard said, which was technically true. He'd spoken to me yesterday, but I'll certainly let you know if I do. Have you checked with her other friends? Perhaps the library where she volunteers? Richard's handling all of that, Sarah said. He's been amazing coordinating with the police, calling hospitals. I just thought I'd check with you directly. Of course. And Sarah, Howard added, his voice softening, I'm sure your mother is all right. Margaret has always been a very capable woman. There was a pause before Sarah responded, her voice smaller now. She has been acting strangely lately. Paranoid, accusing Richard of lying about renovations, claiming he's trying to control her. The doctor says it's part of the dementia progression, but it's so hard to see her this way. I closed my eyes, the pain of hearing my daughter repeat these lies nearly overwhelming. Howard caught my gaze, silently asking if I wanted to speak to her. I shook my head firmly. Cognitive issues can be very challenging for families, Howard said sympathetically. I'm sure you're doing everything you can to support her. We are, Sarah insisted. We found a wonderful memory care facility. She was supposed to move in next week. Richard pulled so many strings to make it happen quickly. I'm sure he did, Howard replied, his tone neutral despite the knowing look he exchanged with me. If you hear from her, please call me immediately, Sarah urged. Or better yet, call Richard. Here's his number. I have all your contact information from the farmhouse sale, Howard assured her. I'll be in touch if I hear anything at all. After ending the call, Howard set down the phone with a troubled expression. She genuinely believes everything Richard has told her. Of course she does. I said bitterly. He's been laying this groundwork for months. The fictional doctor, the manufactured episodes of confusion, the gradual isolation. It's been a masterclass in gaslighting, not just me, but Sarah too. Which makes our job harder, Howard noted. A silver alert means law enforcement is now involved, looking for a supposedly confused elderly woman. If they find you, they'll likely return you directly to Richard and Sarah. Then we need to move quickly, I said. The hearing on Monday may not be enough now, Howard interrupted, his legal mind clearly working through scenarios. With a silver alert active, Richard can claim immediate concern for your safety. He could potentially get an emergency guardianship order before our hearing. Fear clutched at my heart. So what do we do? Howard was silent for a moment, weighing options. We go to the authorities first thing tomorrow morning. Not local police, they're already involved in the silver alert. We go to the district attorney's office with your evidence of Richard's fraud. The forged medical documents alone are enough to trigger an investigation. Will that be enough to protect me from being returned to Richard if I'm found? It should create enough questions about his motives to slow things down, Howard said. But to be completely safe, we should also file for an emergency injunction first thing in the morning. That night, I slept fitfully in Howard's spare bedroom, my dreams haunted by Sarah's voice repeating Richard's lies, by images of the sterile room waiting for me at Sunset Meadows. I woke before dawn, watching the mist rise off the lake as the sky lightened, wondering what the day would bring. Howard was already up, making breakfast and coffee when I emerged from the bedroom. "Sleep okay?" he asked, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs across the counter to me. As well as could be expected, I admitted, gratefully accepting the coffee he offered. "What's the plan for today?" "My colleague Jennifer Zhao will meet us at the district attorney's office at 9, he explained. "She's already reviewed copies of your evidence and agrees we have a strong case for financial exploitation and fraud." I nodded, trying to focus on the practical steps ahead rather than the emotional turmoil churning inside me. "And Sarah, will she be notified?" Howard's expression softened with sympathy. "Eventually, yes, but our immediate priority is establishing your safety and stopping Richard's guardianship attempt. The DA will determine how to proceed with the criminal investigation." As we drove back toward the city, I watched the peaceful lake scenery give way to suburbs and eventually the downtown area where the county offices were located. Howard parked in a public garage several blocks from our destination. "Better not to leave the car in the DA's parking lot," he explained, "in case Richard has people watching government buildings." The precautions seemed extreme, but I was beginning to understand just how calculating and resourceful Richard Palmer truly was. If he had built his financial empire on exploiting vulnerable seniors, he wouldn't surrender easily when one of his targets fought back. At the district attorney's office, we were met by Jennifer Zhao, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with an air of formidable competence. She greeted me with a firm handshake and genuine warmth. "Mrs. Clark, I'm sorry for what you've been experiencing. Based on the evidence Mr. Finch shared, we have a very strong case." "Will it be enough?" I asked, the fear I'd been suppressing bubbling to the surface. "There's a silver alert out for me. If the police find me—" "We've already addressed that," Jennifer assured me. "This morning, I filed an affidavit with the police department explaining that you're safe, not cognitively impaired, and potentially the victim of exploitation. The silver alert has been suspended pending investigation." Relief washed over me. "So I'm not a fugitive?" "Hardly," Jennifer smiled. You're a competent adult who chose to leave an increasingly controlling and potentially abusive situation. You have every right to do so. We were shown to a conference room where Assistant District Attorney Marcus Chen waited. He was younger than I expected, but his questions were focused and thorough as I recounted the entire story, from selling my farmhouse to my escape from Sarah and Richard's home. "These fabricated medical records are particularly troubling," Chen said, examining the photographs I'd taken. "Dr. Hansen doesn't exist, at least not associated with any medical practice in this state. We've checked." A fictional doctor? I shouldn't have been surprised, but somehow this confirmation of Richard's deception still shocked me. "Creating false medical documents is a serious offense," Chen continued. "Combined with the guardianship petition and the evidence of isolation and control, we have enough to open a formal investigation into Mr. Palmer's activities." "What about the man I saw in my cottage?" I asked. "The one using it as some kind of office?" Chen and Jennifer exchanged glances. "That's another avenue we need to explore. If Palmer's investment firm is engaging in fraudulent activities, that could fall under federal jurisdiction, securities fraud, wire fraud, potentially even RICO violations if there's a pattern of organized criminal activity." The legal terminology made my head spin, but one thing was clear: Richard's carefully constructed world was about to face serious scrutiny. "What happens now?" I asked. "First, we need to ensure your continued safety and independence," Jennifer explained. "We'll appear before Judge Ramirez this afternoon for an emergency injunction preventing Richard Palmer from filing for guardianship or making any claims about your mental capacity." "And my daughter, Sarah?" Chen's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Clark, I understand your concern for your daughter, but right now we need to focus on protecting you and gathering evidence. Once the investigation is underway, we'll determine whether Mrs. Palmer had any knowledge of her husband's activities." "She didn't," I said firmly. "Sarah is many things, but she would never knowingly participate in exploiting me or anyone else. She's been manipulated, just as I was initially." "That's our working assumption," Chen agreed. "But we'll need to interview her as part of the investigation. That won't happen today." By late afternoon, we had our emergency injunction. Judge Ramirez, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, listened carefully to my story and reviewed the evidence before issuing her ruling. "The court finds sufficient cause for concern regarding potential financial exploitation and fraudulent activity," she declared. "The emergency injunction is granted. Mr. Palmer is prohibited from filing any guardianship petitions or making any legal claims regarding Mrs. Clark's mental capacity pending full investigation of these allegations." I felt as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I was legally protected from Richard's machinations. "What about my cottage?" I asked Howard as we left the courthouse. "All my belongings are still there." "We'll address that next," he promised. "Now that we have the injunction, we can file for access to retrieve your personal property. But Margaret," he added gently, "it might be best not to return to Sarah and Richard's home just yet. The criminal investigation is only beginning." I nodded, understanding the wisdom of his advice even as my heart ached at the thought of continued separation from my daughter. "Where will I stay?" "My lake house is yours for as long as you need it," Howard offered. "Or if you prefer something closer to town." Jennifer mentioned a senior apartment complex with short-term furnished rentals. I considered my options. The lake house was peaceful but isolated. If I was going to rebuild my life, I needed to be closer to resources, to people. "I think I'd prefer the apartment," I decided. "Somewhere I can start fresh." Howard smiled approvingly. I think that's wise. And speaking of fresh starts, there's something else we should discuss. He pulled a file from his briefcase. I've been looking into the sale of your farmhouse. What about it? The purchase price was well below market value, Margaret. Significantly below. And the buyers, the Andersons? They're not a young professional couple starting a family. They're a shell company owned by Meridian Development, a corporation with ties to Richard Palmer. My heart sank. You're saying Richard orchestrated the purchase of my farmhouse? That the Andersons weren't real? The people you met were likely actors, hired to play the part of buyers. The real purchaser was Meridian Development, which has been buying up properties in your former neighborhood for a large-scale commercial development. I thought back to the friendly couple who'd seemed so excited about raising their children in my home, about planting gardens and hosting family gatherings under the old oak tree. Another deception, another manipulation. So my farmhouse is scheduled for demolition according to the permits filed with the county, along with several other properties in the area. The development plan shows a shopping center and luxury condominiums. Anger surged through me, hot and clarifying. Richard knew about this development plan when he encouraged me to sell. He manipulated the entire situation. My concern for Emily's education, my arthritis making the stairs difficult. He orchestrated everything so I would sell below market value to his development company. Howard nodded grimly, and then isolated you in their home, working toward taking control of whatever assets you had left. It's a comprehensive scheme of exploitation, Margaret, and I suspect you're not the first victim. But I will be the last, I said, my voice steady with determination. Whatever it takes, Howard, I want Richard Palmer stopped. Not just for what he did to me, but for everyone else he's victimized. The next week passed in a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and settling into my new temporary apartment, a modest but comfortable one-bedroom in a senior community downtown. Jennifer had arranged for essential furnishings, and Howard had retrieved some of my clothing and personal items from the basement room at Sarah and Richard's house through a court order. But the most significant development came on Wednesday, when the district attorney's office executed search warrants on Richard's home office and the guest cottage. What they found exceeded even our expectations. Multiple sets of fabricated medical records, Chen reported during our update meeting, not just for you, but for at least 7 other seniors, all clients of Palmer's investment firm, all with substantial assets, all gradually isolated from family and friends before being placed in care facilities. And the guardianship petitions? Howard asked. Filed and granted for 5 of them. Palmer or his associates were appointed guardians in each case, giving them control over millions in combined assets. I felt sick, imagining other vulnerable seniors subjected to the same treatment I had narrowly escaped. What about the man I saw in the cottage? The computers? That's where it gets even more interesting, Chen said, opening another file. The cottage was being used as a boiler room operation, high-pressure sales calls, targeting seniors for Palmer's investment schemes. The man you saw was Kevin Lawson, a former broker who lost his license for securities fraud 3 years ago. And Sarah? I couldn't help asking. Has she been interviewed? Chen's expression softened slightly. Yes, yesterday. She appears genuinely shocked by the allegations against her husband. According to the detectives who spoke with her, she became quite distraught when shown the fabricated medical records and evidence of the property scheme. I closed my eyes briefly, imagining my daughter's distress upon learning that the man she loved had been systematically defrauding vulnerable seniors, including her own mother. "Has she tried to contact me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Not through official channels," Chen replied, "but she did ask the detectives to tell you she's sorry and hopes you'll call her when you're ready." Ready? Would I ever be ready to face my daughter after this breach of trust? To rebuild what Richard had so methodically destroyed between us? "There's one more development you should be aware of," Chen continued, pulling another document from his file. "The FBI has joined the investigation. Palmer's activities cross state lines, and the financial fraud aspects fall under federal jurisdiction." Howard nodded approvingly. "Good. The feds have resources we couldn't dream of at the local level." "What does this mean for the case?" I asked. "It means Palmer is facing potentially much more serious charges," Chen explained. "Securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. The FBI is particularly interested in the property development scheme and how it ties into the elder exploitation cases." "And my farmhouse?" I couldn't help asking. "Is it still scheduled for demolition?" Chen exchanged glances with Howard. "That's complicated. The property was legally sold, even if the circumstances were manipulative. However," he added, seeing my expression fall, "with the fraud investigation ongoing, all of Meridian Development's projects have been temporarily halted." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was something, a stay of execution for the home Thomas and I had loved for so long. The following Sunday, I finally worked up the courage to call Sarah. The phone rang 3 times before her hesitant voice answered. "Mom? Is it really you?" "It's me, sweetheart," I confirmed, my throat tight with emotion. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I had no idea what Richard was doing. I believed him when he said you were having memory problems. I thought I was helping you." "I know, Sarah. I never believed you were knowingly involved. The police showed me the fake medical reports, the guardianship petition, and the development plans for your farmhouse." "Mom, I swear I didn't know about any of it." I believed her. Sarah could be naive, easily influenced, but she had never been malicious or greedy. "Where are you staying?" she asked. "The detectives wouldn't tell me." "In a senior apartment downtown," I replied, not giving specifics. Howard had advised caution until Richard's case was further along. "It's comfortable enough for now. Could we meet somewhere? Please? I need to see you to apologize in person." I hesitated, torn between my longing to reconnect with my daughter and the still raw pain of betrayal. "I need a little more time, Sarah. This has all been overwhelming." "I understand," she said, though I could hear the disappointment in her voice. "Whenever you're ready, I just want you to know I filed for divorce. After what the FBI found, after what Richard did to you and those other people, I can't stay married to him." "Oh, Sarah, I hadn't expected this development so quickly. Are you all right? Where are you staying?" "With my friend Lisa, for now. I couldn't bear to stay in that house, knowing what happened to you in the basement, what was happening in the cottage. The FBI has been through everything anyway. Richard's office, our financial records, everything." "And Emily?" I asked, thinking of my granddaughter, away at college, suddenly finding her family imploding. "She knows some of it. I didn't want to burden her with all the details during finals, but she knows Richard is under investigation and that we're divorcing. She's angry, confused. She wants to see you." "I want to see her too," I admitted. "Perhaps when she's home for the summer break." There was a pause, Then Sarah asked the question I'd been dreading. Will you ever be able to forgive me, Mom, for not seeing what was happening, for believing Richard over you? I took a deep breath, considering my answer carefully. I already have forgiven you, Sarah. You were manipulated by an expert. But trust will take time to rebuild. For both of us. I understand, she said softly. I'll wait however long it takes. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. Always have, always will. After ending the call, I sat for a long time in my new apartment, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk descended. So much had changed in such a short time. The foundations of my life had been shaken, then rebuilt on unfamiliar ground, yet somehow I felt stronger for having weathered the storm. 3 months later, I stood on the porch of my farmhouse, key in hand, hardly able to believe the turn of events. The FBI investigation had uncovered evidence that Richard had used coercion and fraudulent practices in multiple property acquisitions for Meridian Development. As part of a sweeping settlement with federal prosecutors, the company had agreed to rescind several property purchases, including my farmhouse. It still needs some work, Howard commented, standing beside me as I unlocked the door. But structurally, it's sound. Just like me, I quipped, pushing open the door to reveal the familiar entryway. The Andersons, or rather the actors posing as the Andersons, hadn't changed much during their brief occupancy. My old home welcomed me back with creaking floorboards and sunlight streaming through the windows. Thomas had installed decades ago. Behind us, Sarah and Emily unloaded boxes from Sarah's car. This homecoming was a family affair, the first tentative steps toward reconciliation after months of cautious rebuilding. Richard's case was proceeding through the federal court system. He'd been denied bail, deemed a flight risk due to overseas accounts discovered during the investigation. The evidence against him was overwhelming, not just the exploitation scheme targeting me and other seniors, but a decade-long pattern of securities fraud and money laundering. Sarah had finalized her divorce, emerging with little financially but regaining her independence and self-respect. Emily had taken a semester off from Cornell, shaken by the revelations about her stepfather and needing time to process what had happened to our family. As for me, I had become something of an unexpected advocate. Working with Jennifer Zhao, I'd begun speaking to senior groups about financial exploitation and elder abuse, sharing my story to help others recognize the warning signs I had initially missed. "Where do you want these boxes, Grandma?" Emily called, struggling through the door with her arms full. "Living room for now, sweetheart," I directed. "We'll sort everything once we're all settled." Sarah followed with another load, her eyes taking in the familiar surroundings. "It feels strange being back here," she admitted, "like stepping back in time." "Not back," I corrected gently. "Forward. We're not the same people we were when I left this house. We've all learned some hard lessons, the hardest being never to trust a man with teeth that white," Emily joked, referring to Richard's perfect smile that had never quite reached his eyes. Sarah winced, but managed a small laugh. Among other red flags I completely missed. Howard, ever the practical one, consulted his watch. "The moving truck should be here within the hour." "Margaret, are you sure you don't want to wait a few days before moving in? The electricity was just turned on yesterday." "I've waited long enough," I said firmly. 3 months in that apartment was 3 months too many. I want to sleep in my own bed, in my own home. As Howard and Emily continued bringing in boxes, Sarah joined me by the large kitchen window that overlooked the backyard. The oak tree still stood strong, though Thomas's tire swing had long since been removed. "I've been thinking," Sarah said hesitantly, "about what happens next for all of us." "And," I prompted, noting the uncertainty in her voice, "Emily will go back to school in the fall, and I'll need to find a job, an apartment." She paused, then continued in a rush. "But I was wondering if maybe, just for a little while, we could stay here with you, help with the repairs, get the garden back in shape, like when I was growing up, and we all worked on the house together." I studied my daughter's face, the face so like Thomas's, with his determined chin and expressive eyes. I saw regret there, and hope, and a genuine desire to make amends. "I'd like that," I said simply. "This house has always been happiest when it's full of family." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Even after everything that happened, you'd still want me here?" I took her hand, feeling the tremor in her fingers. "Sarah, what Richard did was calculate exactly how to separate us, how to make you doubt me and me doubt you. He nearly succeeded. I won't give him that victory now." She nodded, wiping away tears. "I should have trusted you, should have seen what was happening. We both made mistakes," I acknowledged, "but we're here now, together. That's what matters." Through the window, I could see Emily examining the old oak tree, perhaps imagining the tire swing her grandfather had hung there before she was born. Howard was directing the newly arrived moving truck, his organizational skills in full force. In that moment, standing in my reclaimed kitchen with my daughter at my side, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for Howard's help or Jennifer's legal expertise or even the FBI's intervention, but for my own resilience, the stubborn strength that had refused to surrender to Richard's schemes. I was Margaret Clark, 73 years old. I had lost my home, my dignity, and nearly my family to a predator who saw my age as weakness. But I had fought back, reclaimed what was mine, and in the process perhaps saved others from a similar fate. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, painting golden rectangles on the worn wooden floors, I made a silent promise to Thomas. Our home would once again be filled with love and laughter. Our daughter and granddaughter would heal from Richard's betrayal, and I would continue to speak out, to stand up for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Because if my ordeal had taught me anything, it was this: age might bring physical limitations, but it also brings wisdom, perspective, and a fierce determination that should never be underestimated. Richard Palmer had made the critical error of seeing only an elderly widow, not the formidable woman beneath the silver hair. It was a mistake he would have the next 20 years in federal prison to contemplate.